guys? Welcome back to Pure Evil. I'm the man, I'm your host, as always, Evil Eddie, and I got a real special episode for everybody today and a very special guest. We got Nolan King joining us to break down Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series, Season 2. What's going on, Nolan? How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. I'm excited to be here talking about one of my favorite things in combat sports, the Contender Series, and thanks for having me back on, man. This is my second time, and I'm excited.
Yeah, man, and I'm looking forward to. First off, are you going to be at CES 50, June 15th?
I will be there. I will be in the house next Friday.
So I'll most likely see you there. So moving forward with this episode, just to let everybody know what to expect. This season, Ultimate Fighter is going to be one of the last seasons. Now, they're going to be bringing in Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series, which is currently on UFC Fight Pass. There's going to be a transition later on, but for this season, right now, it's going to be on Fight Pass. So me and Nolan are going to give a complete feel up. We're going to feel up Season 2 to see what to really expect, who to keep your eye on, the start times, the days, and anything that you guys want to talk about. The live chat room is open and Nolan's got some news. But before we break any news or anything like that, Nolan, I want to just kind of get a feel of Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series Season 1 and what's going to be different this season, because I've heard a lot of rumors. Now, first things first, with the commentary, any changes with the commentary? Are they still going to be doing the Snoopcast?
So I don't know about the Snoopcast, but I know that last year there were three commentary groups. There was Dan Hellie and Eve Edwards, Brendan Fitzgerald, who's now with the UFC, and Paul Felder, who's also calling the UFC fights. And then there was the Snoopcast. For this season, not really sure what they're doing with the commentary. I do know that Brendan Fitzgerald told James Lynch on his podcast that he was going to be doing Season 2 once again, and then also Michael Bisping told ESPN that he'd be one of the commentators for this season. So I'm not sure if they're going to have two or three commentary groups or just one, but those are the two that have said so far that they're going to be calling the fights for this season. Now,
with Season 1, what really stood out to you? What was kind of like the, okay, this is the future, let's forget about the Ultimate Fighter. What really stood out to you about Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series? What makes it so special, you think?
I think the thing that stands out is there's two things. One is the fact that it's more focused on the fights. It's less about the drama. You tune in. There are 5 fights in the span of an hour and 45 minutes, and then 15 minutes of the lead-in and then the outro of Dana picking which fighters he wants to add to the roster. So that was one thing. And then the other thing is that every fight counts. These guys are going out there and they're fighting knowing that they not only have to put on, get a win, but they have to put on an exciting performance or a dominant performance. And I think it inspires fighters to maybe take risks that they wouldn't usually take in other fights. Like if they were on The Ultimate Fighter and they had to fight, 3 times in the span of a handful of weeks, they wouldn't be out there trying to knock each other's blocks off or, as much. They would try to stay composed, stay healthy, not try to ruin their bodies. But with this, they know that they need to go balls to the wall. So that's really the big thing, and I think that's what separates it from The Ultimate Fighter.
That, and also the fact of it being live as that element as well of, and this is also on the real records, which is something different than The Ultimate Fighter. On The Ultimate Fighter, if you fought and you lost or you won, it didn't count on your record. The Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series, it's going to count in Season 2. It's going to go on their permanent records, like they say in Doug.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not an exhibition bout; it's a real pro bout, and it goes right on your record. And I think we've seen that, with the fighters that they've signed, not necessarily on the show, but they signed them later on. Like, they still consider the wins to mean something, even if you don't get a contract right off the bat. Whereas with Tough, I guess a lot of the guys do get opportunities, but it's not necessarily. There's always an asterisk kind of that, this was a 2-round fight, it was an exhibition fight, it was multiple fights in a row. So the fighters aren't necessarily held to the same standard when being scouted in the future than if they had an actual fight on their record.
Now, before we get into any details of, how many fights are going to be on the card and if the main event's going to be 5 rounds, let's talk about Season 1 really quick, just to sum that up really quick. Who stood out to you in Season 1? I think the number one name that is on everyone's mind is Sugar Shane O'Malley. Who else, though? Who else can we give credit to on the first season?
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, the best fighter from that season, that the most ready fighter for the UFC, hasn't even competed yet in the UFC, Kurt Hollabaugh. He had one, I shouldn't say he hasn't competed in the UFC. He competed a long time ago, like a few years ago. He had one fight. He was brought over from Strikeforce, and he lost. Went back to the regional scene, destroyed the regional scene at featherweight. at lightweight. And he was the Titan FC champion, comes on, he fought on week 1 against Matt Bissett, and he ran through Bissett, who's a really tough guy. At 145 pounds, he's a monster. He was one of the ones that really stood out to me. Like you said, Sean O'Malley, he's kind of the full package. I didn't think necessarily at the time that he was, when everybody got signed and the end of the summer came, I didn't necessarily think at that point in time he was the best fighter on the show. But I think since that time, we've seen tremendous improvements in his game. And he's somebody that the UFC is totally going to back going forward. So I expect him to continue to make these strides and improvements. And man, there's a lot of good other fighters that came out of it. Julian Marquez, Lauren Mueller, the list goes on and on. So I'm expecting more of the same this season.
And a lot of local guys came out of this season as well. So moving into season 2, this kind of geared us up to get really excited to what to expect. And there were names that you were dropping on social media that were coming out, like Antonina Shevchenko. Nick Newell's going to be on this season. Nolan, who else is going to be on this season that we can look forward to seeing?
I mean, there's a lot of good fighters. I think that if you look at this season, the roster is a lot more deep than last season. I think there were a lot of guys that were maybe a little bit more relatively unknown last season. This year, they seem to go for more established fighters. We have a handful of LFA champions that are going to be competing, a handful of CES top contenders that are going to be competing. Like you said, Shevchenko's a name. I think that Anthony Hernandez, that middleweight champion for LFA, is somebody that you can watch. You even got like the Greg Hardy of the world. I'm sure he's gonna, and the Austin Lane, the NFL football players, they're gonna bring some eyes on too. They're deserve recognition in their own right for other things. And yeah, man, I mean those are kind of the more well-known names. But I also think if you go deeper into the roster, there's a lot of these guys that may not be known that are very good fighters and are totally ready to take it to the next step.
I mean, I just spoke with Justin Sumner, who trains under Nick Newell here, 10 minutes away from me right now. They're training right down the road from me here. And the energy that they're saying is in that gym, knowing that they're both going to be on, week 6 and week 7 of this season. It feels so special. Nick Newell really seems like the breakthrough story on this. The weird thing, though, and I want to get your take on this, is with Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series, we see a lot of younger guys with 4 or 5 fights. But on the other hand, Nick Newell, he's got 14, 15 fights. Only 1 loss, though, to Justin Gaethje. Now, what are you expecting going into this? Were you kind of surprised that he was going to be one of the contestants on this season, knowing that he's more of a veteran compared to some of the guys that we've seen on season 1?
I honestly, I might be in the minority here, but I think it was the right move for him. I think that there was some question about where he was going with his career. He had that retirement. He was out for a few years, came back, looked great in his LFA debut. But I feel like I wouldn't want him to rush into a situation like this. I think if there's any question in people's minds about, what he can do in the cage, that they should put him on the show. This is a perfect example, of a fighter that should be on the show, proving yourself to the UFC, because the UFC, for whatever reason, is tentative about signing him. I don't know why, but it's just the way that it is. So he should make any doubt in their mind go away with this opportunity. And for Newell, is he good enough to be in the UFC right off the bat? Yeah, absolutely. He's not, if he got signed, he would not be the worst lightweight on the roster by far. With that being said, there's a lot of guys on the regional scene in the United States and Canada and Mexico overseas that are better than a lot of UFC fighters, but they still don't get these opportunities for whatever reason. I mean, even looking at the Contender Series for this upcoming season, there's a guy, CES champion, fighting next week, Chris Curtis. He's won a handful of fights in a row. He holds 4 belts across regional scenes, and for some reason, they didn't sign him right to the UFC either. So Newell's not necessarily like an exception to the rule. I think he's just he's in this boat of fighters that, for whatever reason, the UFC, despite them being established fighters who have proven themselves, the UFC hasn't necessarily been interested. I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing for Newell. I actually think that this is kind of a perfect step up from his last fight to the UFC.
In his last fight, he fought Luque, and he got the victory once again, which left no doubt in my mind he's ready for the next step, especially after taking that time off, seeing what the one guy who beat him has been able to do in the UFC. I think it reassured him. And I had Nick on about 2 years ago, and he had a movie that was about to be made after him, done by the people who were making 12 Cloverfield Lane or something like that. And it just seemed a little off because the way that his story ended at that time was he had that loss to Justin, and then that was really it. He opened up the gym. To have him come on their Tuesday Night Contender Series, if he gets the win and then goes on to the UFC, it would just make for a Rocky-style ending for Nick. And you know what? For this season, it really seems like they brought in more, not controversial, but more of what the hell is going to happen, or you're going to root against somebody, kind of like Hardy. Let's get into Hardy, who, just in case nobody is familiar, what's Hardy's backstory and what's so controversial about him?
Yeah, so he was in the NFL. He was, a phenomenal linebacker in the. Excuse me, I'm not as familiar with football, but he was a phenomenal player in the NFL, and he got in some trouble because there were some accusations about his about domestic abuse with him. Went through this long process about whether or not he did it, and the NFL did their investigation, and they suspended him. He's a name that has been all over ESPN. He's got the story outside of football that has made him very controversial, and he's been kind of out of the public eye for a few years. He's been notable for his MMA fights. I think that's when people started hearing about him again. He's had 3 amateur fights since leaving the NFL, and he's won them all. His last fight was an amateur fight for LFA, which he defeated a 4-0 amateur by 30-second knockout, something like that, or maybe it was even less than that. But yeah, he's somebody that's a freak athlete. I don't think we've necessarily seen another sports athlete come into MMA when he's in his prime of his athletic abilities. So I think it'll be interesting there, and he's kind of a specimen. But the guy he's fighting, Austin Lane, another NFL player who has built himself a little bit more. He's 4-0 in MMA, and he's fought on Flow Combat on their fights quite a few times. And he's somebody that could be, he's a prospect that in his own right was circled for this Contender Series. So it's an interesting angle they're going at, doing the NFL versus NFL.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And just in case anybody was like, what's up with all these sports guys coming over? This is nothing new. We've been seeing this for years, even going back to season 10 of The Ultimate Fighter. They had, Matt Mitrione, who was on the New York Giants, Brandon Schaub, college football. I mean, this is nothing new. But the success rate really isn't all that much. But at the same time, where these two are at right now, like you said, he's in his prime. We haven't seen somebody switch over in their prime. So this is going to be interesting to see. And another contender on this season that everyone is up in arms for, especially coming off of her win at Lion Fight a couple of weeks ago, that I was actually ringside for, Antonina Shevchenko, sister of Valentina Shevchenko. Watching that fight, I was a little worried because if she goes in there and has the same exact performance, which most likely won't happen because she was, doing Muay Thai and we're switching over to MMA. If it was the same performance, all stand-up, exactly the same, I don't think Dana White would sign her. And I love the Shevchenko sisters. They know this. I'm just being honest. Do you think, just being a Shevchenko sister, if she gets a win, not necessarily a finish, do you think that would be enough for her to come on the UFC? Because let's not forget, they don't sign everybody on this season.
Yeah, it's tough because I think last season they didn't necessarily have these notable names that have an extra promotable trait to them last season. They had mostly fighters that were from LFA that weren't champions that people didn't necessarily know. But now, like you said, they're bringing in these names that that are already established coming into the show. So it'll be interesting to see if they try to gear any of their decisions around this. I think season 1 they did a pretty good job of not getting too caught up in the performances or the aura of people that are coming into the cage. They seem to gear their decisions around the performances in the cage. So I'm hoping it stays that way. But if she goes out there and she puts on a very complete performance or a very dominant performance and she doesn't get a finish, I still think that they could sign her. She's definitely one of the names. There's only a couple women's fights this season so far. She's one of the names that you should have circled on your scouting report because I think that this is a perfect fight for her in terms of her career trajectory. This is a step up from anybody she's fought. Silvana Gomez Juarez is a fighter who has contended for the KSW championships over in Poland. So she's very legit, and I think this is good matchmaking. So it really just depends on what kind of performance she puts on out there.
And you know what? To Antonina's defense here, let me say this: it would have been, maybe she played it safe, because if she ended up losing that fight and lost her title at Lion Fight, it wouldn't have looked that pretty coming into the UFC when we already knew that she was going to be on the Contender Series. MMA, on the other hand, we've seen Muay Thai girls or Muay Thai fighters come over to MMA. Look at Jarina Bars, the one girl who's beat Chris Cyborg in Muay Thai. She tried transferring over to MMA. Unfortunately, girls were just taking her down and grinding her out. Do you think maybe her opponent will play that same card, or what kind of opponent is Antonina facing here?
Yeah, she's facing an Argentinian who, like I said, competed in KSW. But I think that that Juarez would be smart to go for the takedown. I don't think she wants to stand and trade with a Muay Thai fighter with quite the Muay Thai credentials like Shevchenko has. I think that this is the best girl that Shevchenko's fought, like I said. I think that the ground skills that Juarez presents too will be, her go-to. But we'll see. Shevchenko's done a solid job thus far of not letting opponents deal with her too much on the ground. But at the same time, if you look at the 5 opponents that Shevchenko's fought, their combined record at the time that she fought them is 4-5 between the 5 opponents. So she hasn't gotten, the type of experience and skill level that she's going to find in the Contender Series.
So Nolan, who else is going to be on this season that we can look forward to seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I can run down some names for you. I think week 1, if you look at the fighters that I'm really zoning in on, I think Chris Curtis is one of them. He's the CES welterweight champion, a guy that's dominated on the regional scene, more of a seasoned veteran, kind of in that Nick Newell category of we don't really know why this fighter wasn't signed before, straight to the UFC. Training partner Sam Alvey under Dan Henderson. So I think he's one to watch on week 1. I think the other one to watch on week 1 is Kevin Holland. He's the number 1 ranked middleweight in Texas and California, which if you follow the regional scene, those are 2 of the best regional circuits in the United States. So he's coming over to fight Will Santiago, a former CES title holder. So that's going to be a good fight. I think Holland and Curtis are my picks for week 1, which airs on Tuesday. And then if you look at the rest of the season, some names that stick out to me, I referenced Anthony Hernandez previously. He's the LFA middleweight champion. I think he's a phenomenal fighter. You've also got LFA light heavyweight champion Ryan Spann, a guy that was on Contender Series last year and was finished fairly quickly, but has rebounded and not got down on himself, and he's going to be back. A couple other names, Dwight Grant. He's a AKA product, trains out with Cain Velasquez and all those guys. He's a middleweight. I've heard glowing things about him. All his teammates speak very, very highly of Grant. So he's one to watch. And then some other names, T. Edwards. He's a MMA lab fighter. He'll be fighting on week 3, trains down in Phoenix. He's an excellent lightweight, very highly skilled wrestler in college. And since he's come over to MMA, most of his wins have been by knockout. So he's another one to watch. And then later on in July, if you keep going, July 17th, there's two people that I've circled on my roster. Vince Morales, he's a bantamweight fighter, cousin of Ricky Simone, the UFC fighter. He's an excellent prospect that not a lot of people know about. And then on that same card with him, Macy Barber is a 115-pound LFA fighter who fought a couple weeks ago, actually. She's one to definitely keep your eye on. And then if you keep going on the season, later on, a couple of heavyweights that I've circled, Juan Adams, an undefeated fighter. He's fought for LFA. Dontel Mays, who I think is arguably the best heavyweight in the regional scene in North America. His record's not the best, but one of his losses was via disqualification, and more recently he's put on some phenomenal performances. So those are kind of my picks as of now. I know you probably were only looking for a couple, but I'm just so excited about this season. And
we need to inform listeners that are tuning in specifically for what to expect this season.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's my brief rundown. There's a lot of other guys. Ian Heinzich, the guy that Justin Sumter's fighting. He's an LFA interim champion right now. Excellent fighter. And then, like you said, Nick Newell, another guy. But yeah, man, the list goes on and on. They got a lot of these picks right. They got a lot more of them right than they got wrong.
So just to let everybody know, this is going to be starting going down June 12th, which is this week, and ending August 7th. Now, I've been hearing a lot of rumors, Nolan, about them doing something in Brazil. What is this rumor about? Is this official? That we're going to be running an extra month this season?
Yeah, so basically what's happening is, like you said, the season ends August 7th. That's the last United States episode. It will air live on Fight Pass on Tuesday, just like normal. Then August 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th, they'll be flying out, I believe, I'm trying to think, 30 fighters from Brazil to do, must be more than that. I don't know. It's at least 30 fighters from Brazil to do record a version for the Brazilian, for Brazil. Pre-recorded, yes. So it will air in Brazil. Maybe I don't know exactly the airing date, but a couple months after, something like that, or maybe a month, and they'll have, I believe that they're having 6 episodes worth, so there'll be 30 fights, 60 Brazilian fighters, and that will take place 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th at the Tough Gym in Las Vegas, pre-recorded, and once it airs in Brazil, it will be put on UFC Fight Pass.
All over the world, so here in the States as well.
Correct. We'll be able to watch it on replay as well as soon as it comes out as soon as it airs in Brazil. That's my understanding.
So also, guys, let you know there's going to be 5 fights per episode. Nolan, is that enough? I think that's the perfect amount of fights for people to kind of digest in one.
Yeah,
sitting.
Absolutely. Last summer, I thought it was perfect. Because there's not many times in MMA where we get to sit down, watch 5 high-level fights in 2 hours. You only have to dedicate 2 hours, and you still feel like you got something out of it. So I think it's perfect, man, especially with the UFC schedule over the summer. Like, there's so many events in July that it would become unbearable if we had 10 fights a card or something. It would just be really tough to dedicate Tuesdays, Saturdays, sometimes Fridays, sometimes Sundays to your MMA. So I think this is perfect. We get our midweek dose, and we get us excited for the weekend when we have the full 12-fight card.
So ultimately, we already know that ESPN is picking up UFC off of FS1. So after the season on the UFC Fight Pass, do you think they're going to switch it onto ESPN, kind of like they have on FS1 with The Ultimate Fighter?
Yeah, so what it looks like they're going to do in the press release is that in Season 3, will start airing in June of 2019, and it will air on ESPN Plus, the streaming app, and it will be, the same amount of episodes as this season, I believe, 8 episodes. I'm assuming, barring any changes that they'll make going forward, I think it will be the same. I think they'll continue with the what's been working for them.
So, Nolan, before we let you go, man, is there anything else that you want to let us know about this season, what to expect, what to look forward to?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I said that I was going to come on here and break a fight, so that's what I'm going to do. I just got word that on July 24th, the episode that Nick Newell is going to be on, LFA heavyweight champion Jeff Hughes is in the works to take on former Bellator veteran Josh Apelt. Apelt fought Bobby Lashley. That's probably where he's most well known for. But that will be, if all goes well, it seems like that fight is all good to go. And on July 24th, those two will be squaring off inside the Contender Series cage.
Nolan, last time I saw you was at CES, and we were talking about Greg Rebello. Is he going to be on this season the season Fighter, this season of Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series?
That he is, man. He'll be on the June 26th episode 3. He'll be fighting Oscar Ivan Cota, a Mexican heavyweight that not many people really know much about. There's not a whole lot of tape out there on him, and even the tape that does exist is either old or kind of it's like a highlight video, so you can't even kind of tell how the fight was going. So, yeah, he'll be on June 26th. I actually talked to Greg the other day, and he's viewing this as his last hurrah. This is the last chance for him to get into the big show. So we'll see what happens. I think it will be a fun matchup, and kind of having that unknown opponent makes it even more interesting for everybody watching at home.
Fingers are crossed. There are so many exciting fights to look forward to this season. Nolan, everyone can find your work at MMAtoday.com and also flowcombat.com, correct?
Yeah, MMA Today, Flow Combat, and then also I've started working with Tapology. So if anybody finds any errors in our database or anything, just let me know. But starting this weekend, hopefully today, I'll be putting out my Contender Series profile interview pieces. I try to talk to as many of the Contender Series guys as possible, give their backstory and their thoughts on the upcoming fight. So I think I talked to 5 of the guys that are going to be on this week's episode, 5 or 6. So those will start cranking out this weekend, and yeah, man, I'm excited for this time of year. I'm glad you had me on, so thank you.
Last but not least, who else is breaking this news? I see James Lynch and Sean Bitter.
Yeah, so Sean Bitter's done a really good job with the Contender Series stuff. It seems like me and him have kind of taken over most of that. If you're looking for, in my opinion, he's the best interviewer in the game. I think he gets his interviews out like I don't even know how he does this many interviews, man. You look at some of the weeks he's doing like 20 interviews, but he's always first. He always gets he always gives the prospects respect. If they get a fight announced, he always is the first one to talk to them. So definitely check out James. I think he's if you're looking for Contender Series coverage in terms of getting to hear from some of these guys on video, things like that, like he's the go-to guy. And then if you're looking for breaking news, I would say that Sean's done an excellent job, and I've had my fair share of breaking fights as well.
Of course, Nolan, you're my go-to, man. I got you on my notifications. Anytime you tweet anything, it could be good morning, guys. I know immediately. So
I appreciate it, Eddie.
Nolan, thank you so much. I'll be seeing you next week, the day after my birthday, June 15th, and we'll talk then, man. Thank you so much for coming on here. People can follow you on social media at MMA_Kings. Is that Twitter and Instagram?
So yeah, right now I'm just on Twitter and Facebook for my MMA stuff, and on MMA Today's Facebook, and then my personal Twitter here that you guys all follow. So that's it for me now. I should be launching an Instagram pretty soon.
Nolan, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll talk with you soon.
Hey, thanks, Eddie. Take it easy.
Behave yourself.
I will.
There you go, guys. Nolan King joining me to give a rundown on Season 2 of Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. I cannot wait for this season to go down. I will be watching week to week, episode to episode. I will be giving my predictions. Also, I'm going to be trying to get on as many of these guys as I can. But in the meantime, go check out Nolan's page. He has complete coverage. I don't care what he's saying about anyone else. Nolan is the go-to guy. Also, James Lynch and Sean Bitter. Anyone else out there that I'm forgetting, I'm sorry. Those are the three people I've been seeing really consistent on giving us updates, sharing news, getting interviews out, and like Nolan was just saying, constantly pumping out interviews. It's exactly what I'm trying to do here with you guys, so I hope you're enjoying it. If you do, it would mean an awful lot to give me a thumbs up to let me know you're enjoying the videos. Subscribe down below, also on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher. You can find all the Pure Evil MMA content at mymmanews.com. Last but not least, guys, UFC 225 is going down. My prediction show is up. Ultimate Fighter Season 27, Episode 8 recap last night. That is up as well, where I was joined by Suman Makatran, who randomly just called in the middle of the show. I mean, we were blessed how that worked out. My phone was going off like it is right now behind me, blinking. If you listen to the podcast, you can't see what's going on behind me, but another thing, we're in a new studio, guys. Loving the new vibe, loving the new feeling here. Things couldn't be better for me here at Pure Evil MMA. Got my tattoo appointment coming up. Gonna get Pure Evil done on the fists. This isn't a game, guys. It's a lifestyle. Keep it 100 with you, and you know it. Last but not least, behave yourselves.